On Tech News today, Google says Motorola to Lenovo, Facebook launches Paper, and a fitness app shames you into losing weight. All that and more coming up next.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Tech News Today is provided by CashFly at CACHEFLY.com.
It's Thursday, January 30th, 2014, and this is Tech News Today. This episode is brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform that makes it fast and easy to create your own professional website or online portfolio. For a free 2-week trial and 10% off, go to squarespace.com and use the offer code TNT1. And by Gazelle, the fast and simple way to sell your used gadgets. Find out what your used iPhone, iPad, or other Apple products are worth at Gazelle.com. Welcome to Tech News Today. I'm Mike Elgin.
I'm Sarah Lane.
And I'm Jason Howell.
Tech News Today explores the top tech news in 30 minutes or less. Well, you may have heard, Google has agreed to sell its Motorola mobility division to Lenovo. The $2.91 billion sale comes just 2 years after Google acquired Motorola for $12.5 billion. Google will keep about 15,000 of Motorola's patents, and Lenovo will take the remaining 2,000. Joining us today to talk about all this is Ina Fried, a reporter for Recode and formerly with All Things D and CNET. Thank you for joining us, Ina.
Sure, happy to be here.
How will this deal affect Motorola users and fans?
I think for users, there's very little impact today. I think what it ensures is that, the Motorola brand will live on. Some of the products that we've seen from them will continue, but in a different hands. I think the best way to get a sense of it is to look what Lenovo did when they bought IBM's PC unit back in 2005. I think a lot of people wondered back then, would these great ThinkPads change? And the fact Lenovo did a great job of keeping those ThinkPads, everything that kind of was great about a ThinkPad continues to this day under Lenovo's hands.
And that's a great point, and it'll be amazing if they can do that again. That was quite a feat. Now, a lot of people are speculating that the sale of Motorola was tied to recent items in the news, specifically Samsung's negotiated outcome over the magazine UX interface and also the patent negotiations that Google and Samsung successfully completed. But on the other hand, Samsung can't be thrilled that Lenovo is getting such a huge boost here. Do you think that there's any connection between those stories and the sale?
It's hard to imagine that there isn't. When we broke that story about Samsung making all these changes, we kind of wondered what was Samsung getting? Because, Google has a lot of power, but so does Samsung. And I think the question was, what is Samsung getting out of this? And I think we found out a few hours later, Google's getting out of the handset business, at least the Motorola handset business. They still do the Nexus program, which some handset makers like, some don't. But at least they no longer have Google as a large competitor. So I think they'd rather see Motorola in Lenovo's hands than in Google itself.
Now, I understand that Google will retain a stake of about 5% in Lenovo, so they'll be involved in the company, at least from that perspective. And, Google is notorious for making deals and making decisions that are multifaceted and solve multiple problems at once. And Google's biggest problem right now, I think, personally, I think their biggest business problem is China. Their search engine market share is only about 1.6%. Only 3.5% of Android devices in China use Google's Play Store. So although Android is massively huge in China, Google isn't really getting that much activity on their services that actually bring them money. Do you think, or do you have any information on whether or not there's anything in this Lenovo deal that will offer Google apps and services inside China through Lenovo?
I don't have any direct information, but it's a great point. It will be really interesting to see if this helps them in China. Google's had this hot, cold relationship with China. They've been in, they've pulled out over political and other reasons. But the point you raise is excellent. I mean, there's a lot of Android within China, but very little Google services on those Android devices. It'll be interesting to see Lenovo's one of the biggest sellers already of Android devices in China, and it will be very interesting to see if with this deal, do they start including the Google services?
Yeah. One of the biggest and most interesting thing about Motorola was the Moto Maker website and their factory construction within the United States of custom-built, customized to a certain extent, Moto X's. Do you know what's going to happen to this factory?
I think its future is in some question. They asked on the analyst or the reporter conference call yesterday about that, and Lenovo was pretty quick to say, we're keeping the employees in the Bay Area, we're keeping the offices near Chicago. And then when asked about this relatively new plant in Texas, they said, we're going to have to evaluate things, and they were very non-committal. So I think its future is very much in question. Though obviously it gives Lenovo some room if they encounter political opposition. It does give them a chit to play. They could promise to keep it, well, it'll be interesting to see what sort of regulatory, political, patriotic fervor gets raised by this deal. There is a committee in the Treasury Department on foreign investment that looks at these kinds of deals. So this does, by not committing from the outset, it also does give them a card to play if this becomes a political battle at all.
Do you think there's any chance at all that that this won't be approved in the United States or China?
It seems unlikely to me. I'm not an expert on these things, but I've watched a number of these, particularly because Motorola makes handsets, not the network equipment. And if you look at where the biggest concerns from the government have been, from the U.S. government, they've been around Chinese companies making networking gear. So Huawei, ZTE have big networking businesses outside the U.S., but they really haven't been able to crack American shores because of political concerns. But both Huawei and ZTE, Chinese brands, do sell phones in the U.S., so it seems unlikely that we wouldn't allow Lenovo to sell phones in the U.S.
That's a great point. Well, we're going to talk about what Google kept, because what they purchased from Motorola is not what they sold. They hung on to some really interesting attributes of the company. But first, we're going to take a quick break, and I'm going to tell you about Squarespace. Squarespace, of course, is the all-in-one platform that makes it easy to create your own professional website or online portfolio, and also personal sites. My own son, Kevin, is getting married later this year, and he wanted to put up a very quick site for his wedding, just to let people who are coming to the wedding know about it and to set the date and that sort of thing. He built this site in about an hour and a half, maybe. And he's going to be building it up as he gets closer to the big date. This is a perfect example of what you can do very casually and very simply with Squarespace. You can also create a very professional site, including even commerce, and sell things online. So it's a fantastic site that everybody in my family actually uses all the time. It's a really great site. They have new features, new designs, and better support, and they get better and better all the time. They have 20 new beautiful templates for you to start with. Then you can tweak those and change those using their online tools to create a very customized site that still retains the design beauty that it started with. It's easy to use. They have 24/7 support, and it costs only $8 a month at the start. It includes a free domain name if you sign up for a year. It's mobile ready too. The new Squarespace metric app for iPhone and iPad lets you check site stats like page views, unique visitors, and social media follows. And the blog app will help you make text updates, tap and drag images to change layouts, and monitor comments on the go, which is very, very important. Even their code is beautiful. Squarespace looks beautiful on the outside and the inside. All the code is designed very elegantly, as any good developer can tell you. And of course, Squarespace takes care of the hosting, so you don't have to deal with that. Start a free 2-week trial with no credit card required and start building your website today. When you decide to sign up for Squarespace, make sure you use the offer code TNT1 to get 10% off and show your support for this show, Tech News Today. We thank Squarespace for their support. And remember that Squarespace is everything you need to create an exceptional website. Well, on the surface, Google's Moto acquisition. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Sarah. This is your story. Go for it.
Oh, it's okay.
I jumped right in there.
So you mentioned beforehand that Google's acquisition and sale of Motorola, it might sound bad because they bought it for $12.5 billion and they're selling it for $2.91 billion. But what Google sold to Lenovo is a subset of what they purchased. So for starters, Google sold Motorola Home, the TV set-top box business, for $2.6 billion to a company called Aris a little over a year ago. Google also kept around 15,000 patents. Remember that acquisition was originally viewed as mostly about patents. And finally, Google is keeping Motorola's Advanced Research and Development Group, headed by former DARPA head Regina Dugan, who is working on the Project Ara, which is a modular smartphone handset, electronic tattoos. I'm kind of excited about the idea of that, microchip pills, and other projects.
Yeah, this is a fascinating aspect of this story that's been underplayed, which is all the things that Google kept. And, primary among these is the patents. When they first bought Motorola, everybody said it was all about the patents. And, of course, they've gotten a lot of miles out of that. Ina, what do you think about the value of these patents? Do we have any sense of which patents Google kept and which ones they license, and to what extent they're going to be cross-licensing these patents?
Well, I would assume, again, they didn't specify, but I would assume that most of the patents that Lenovo got, around 2,000 in all, were the patents that were directly related to handset technology, particularly around designs for particular phones. Again, just speculation. But importantly, as you point out, there is a cross-licensing deal. They did mention that on the call. So presumably both Google and Lenovo will have access to the patents they need in the long term to keep their businesses going. I suspect that Google kept the kind of patents that it thinks might help it defend Android and Chrome to a lesser degree over patent attacks going forward. Now, they haven't been as successful as they hoped. At one time, Google valued the patent portfolio alone at $5.5 billion. I think one would have to say it's not as valuable as Google first thought, given what's happened in the courts in the intervening years since Google bought Motorola.
I think one of the underappreciated factors in all this, when people do the math about whether this is a horrible deal or a brilliant move by Google, is the fact that this division was losing $645 million a year, at least in the first 9 months of last year. So, yeah, again, that's just part of the year. And so it was likely to continue losing money. It appeared to be that Google's strategy was to eliminate a whole bunch of products, focus very strongly on the Moto X and Moto G lines, to a lesser extent the Droid lines, and then grow those into market share leaders, kind of a Apple strategy of having a fewer number of products that are very popular. So to what extent do you think this helps Google to stop losing money?
Well, I don't think the cash losses were the biggest factor for Google. I mean, it was losing money. They certainly had made the kind of changes to pare those losses. I mean, Motorola that they sold to Lenovo is a drastically smaller and different company than the one they bought 2 years ago. So I don't think that they were just sort of grooming it for a sale all along. It's hard to think they would have made as deep changes as they had if their plan was to sell it all along. It would have been easy to turn around and sell the handset division if all they really wanted were the patents. I think there was a shift in mindset. It's not clear when that happened. But I think the Motorola today is a different company. It's an interesting handset maker. It's interesting, too, what it pairs with Lenovo, because Lenovo takes a very different approach. They're in very different markets than Motorola has been in, and they have a much larger product lineup. They focus on large screen phablets, which are popular in China and the markets that Lenovo's strong in. So when they say these two businesses are complementary, they're not totally using marketing speak. I mean, they really do attack different geographies with different products. I do question how well those two businesses will fit together. I mean, you have two different mindsets toward device manufacture, and handset acquisitions, hardware acquisitions in general, have been relatively tough.
Well, there's a curious fact in all of the news around this sale, and that fact is that Regina Dugan and her group, which I believe is under 100 people, they make all kinds of crazy stuff, the modular smartphone that Sarah mentioned, the electronic tattoos, microchip pills, and all that kind of stuff. They sound like a perfect fit for Google's Google X Labs with all the crazy stuff they're working on. And yet they're actually going to report into Sundar Pichai and inside the Android group. Do you know what these folks with their amazing research is going to do for Android itself?
I think Google has a vision for Android that goes beyond phones and tablets. And I think the unit that Regina leads has always sort of been tasked with making sure that somebody was really looking at where can Android go down the road. And Google has always had access to the kinds of R&D resources that hardware makers don't. I mean, they have small margins and they can only spend a limited amount of money looking at crazy future stuff. And I think it is important to Google that somebody look at what does the future look like. And I think even in Google's approach to Motorola, they were really trying to figure out what markets aren't being served. And I think had they kept Motorola, the focus probably would have evolved to being a sort of trailblazer rather than a market share leader. I think by keeping that unit within Android, it sort of sends where they want to put that investment. And I think it's other places that Android can go. I think they feel like the phone and tablet markets are pretty well served. I think anyone would say lots of people are making interesting hardware around Android. I think the question is, can it, be a factor in the home? Can it be in other places? And I think that's an area where Google still sees some benefit in investing in some primary research.
I also wonder whether Google is going to get into the sort of Intel approach with Android and come out with reference designs, basically products that are designed to lead the industry and show other companies what they could build, specifically around the modular handset. Do you think that's possible, and do you think we'll ever see a modular handset like the Aura?
I mean, Aura is really interesting. I've been skeptical since it was first shown. If you look at the process of what it takes to get a handset approved, not just by national regulators, but also by carriers, it's a long process. And it's hard to imagine a modular phone, especially when people are replacing these devices every 2 years. It's really interesting. But think about it. The PC used to be a modular device. You buy it, and then later you could replace the hard drive, you could replace the processor. And that was sort of what some people did with their computers. And over time, that's evolved to an appliance, something that you really don't tinker with. It can't be upgraded. And the phone is already an appliance. It's already something you don't tinker with, you just replace. So it's hard to imagine, in a sense, technologically going backwards and creating something modular. You can see the appeal, but it's hard to imagine it taking hold, at least for me.
Well, I thank you for your time and for your insights. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Sure, anytime. Thanks.
You can find Ina on Twitter at Ina Fried and also on recode.net. While the focus has been on how the deal affects Google and Motorola, it's worth taking a look at what it means for Lenovo. Lenovo is a company reborn. Based in Beijing, Lenovo is now the world's biggest PC maker by unit sales, and it's an empire built on acquisitions primarily, and successful acquisitions. Lenovo's IBM personal computer business and its popular ThinkPad line in 2005, and it's agreed to acquire IBM's Intel-based server business this year. The company is planning aggressive growth in global smartphone sales, and it's already the #4 or #5 handset maker in the world, thanks mostly to low-end smartphone sales in China. But the Motorola buy makes Lenovo #3 after Samsung and Apple. They are now or soon will be the #3 smartphone maker. With us to talk about this is Brian Bennett, a senior editor for CNET. Thanks for joining us, Brian.
Hi, guys. Thanks for being here.
Well, this piece you wrote today called 5 Ways Lenovo Could Outdo Google in Remaking Motorola had some really interesting points. Lenovo has some serious advantages and skills in this area. Can you tell us a little bit about what those are?
Sure. I mean, first of all, if you've looked at Motorola phones within the past year, even after the acquisition by Google, you'll see that the handsets are actually not as good as they can be. They're almost as good as a lot of the flagship devices from, say, Samsung, definitely Apple, and even HTC. So what Lenovo brings to the table is a lot of the sort of hardware marshaling might that it has from its PC side, and also we will, likely move that hardware over to the upcoming Motorola devices that hopefully we'll be seeing soon. So a lot of the like the Moto X, for instance, or the new Droids, they all use something called the X8 processing platform, which basically is a very slow, it's not really cutting edge as some of the flagships that you see from Samsung, Apple, and HTC. So I think they're going to bring a lot of this know-how from making phones, in the Chinese market, but also with ambitious designs that they just recently showed at CES in 2014 in January here. Basically going to bring a lot of these new cutting-edge processors from Qualcomm that a lot of its competitors, Motorola's competitors, are implementing into their designs now.
They have a lot of skills, but they also are looking to, to get into the U.S. market. They've seemed to have been obsessed by the U.S. market, and probably because of their experience with the ThinkPad line and other IBM lines that are very, very successful in corporations in the U.S. But the Motorola deal comes with something like 50 mobile carrier relationships around the world, including all 4 of the carriers in the United States. And of course, you can't get anywhere in the U.S. unless you've got good relationships with the carriers. Do you think that's a big reason why Lenovo bought this from Google?
Oh yeah, I mean it's absolutely huge. The hardest thing about the American market, as you say, for smartphones or phones in general, is getting past the carriers who are the gatekeepers for marketing your devices and boosting your sales. So if you don't get those deals, you basically don't go anywhere. And a lot of other companies, like a lot of Chinese companies like ZTE, Huawei, and even some of the smaller ones like Oppo and Meizu, really wish they could break into the market like Motorola has over has a huge history of being on all these carriers, and ZTE, has a lot of low-end phones, but can't quite make it to, have a huge penetration across all, of the major U.S. carriers. So with this deal, Lenovo basically instantly becomes a major player in the smartphone U.S. market for smartphones.
A lot of companies make a lot of acquisitions, and it always seems to be that in the final analysis, the acquisition is often a bad idea or doesn't give the company the kind of additional technology or benefits that they thought for a variety of reasons. It's very complex, for example, to integrate one company into another. But Lenovo's been super successful with their acquisitions. Do you know what it is about that company that makes them so good at acquisitions and integrating those into successful product lines?
Well, I mean, if we look at what they did with the IBM ThinkPad brand and, taking their PC and mostly their laptop, most importantly, their laptop business into their own internal structure. And you see that they have a very, they have a lot of desire to get into the U.S. market. And they also have the knowledge to take a lot of the designs that were, really top-notch designs from IBM. Everyone talks about the ThinkPad keyboards and how excellent they are, and they've pretty much kept to that standard. They've, when you buy a ThinkPad now, it's still a very, very nice machine, very well designed. So they have a history of being able to roll out products in the U.S. and globally with a legacy brand like IBM ThinkPad and continue it with great success. So the fact that they're actually, taking over something that's very difficult, getting into the phone business, it's something that people run into huge problems with. I mean, you saw with HP buying Palm, that completely fell apart and was a terrible, terrible situation. So I think we're going to see something very different. Lenovo has the desire, has the will, and the motivation to get into the U.S. market, and also has the chops as far as making really top-notch hardware, both smartphones in China and also globally for ThinkPad devices, ThinkPad laptops, across the entire globe.
It's kind of astonishing to think that Lenovo, which has been known for years and years as the obscure Chinese company that bought the ThinkPad line, is now the #1 PC maker and the #3 smartphone maker. They're literally one of the biggest technology companies in the world, and I think they're here to stay, especially if you look at their fast growth in China and increasingly around the world. Those fascinating insights, and I thank you so much for joining us, Brian.
Sure, thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks. You can find Brian at @BOliverBennett on Twitter and also on CNET. Well, Facebook finally got around to making an honest person out of those of us who talked about the rumors.
Yeah, so the rumors said that we would get something by the end of the month, and Facebook did deliver. The company announced its rumored Paper iOS app this morning. It's called Paper, even though there's another app called Paper, but it's very different. The app is designed to look like a newspaper, but stories are selected both by social algorithms and also by human editors with real heartbeats. People.
Well, it's a risky business to use people in your company. Matthew Ingram is joining us today to talk about Paper. He's a senior writer at GigaOM. Thank you for coming on the show, Matthew. So why the heck did Facebook want to get into the crowded mobile news reader business?
That's a great question. I have a feeling it's because, and I don't know this, but I have a feeling it's because they sense or they've got data that shows that people are not engaging with the regular news feed. And so I think they're hoping that by pulling some items out of the news feed and curating them, or whatever term you want to use, editing them, putting them into a nicer sort of UI on the mobile handset, that maybe they can get more engagement from those users.
I mean, Mark Zuckerberg has said, and he reiterated in the earnings call yesterday, that Facebook's interested in more standalone apps. This is obviously part of that initiative. You can obviously think of Instagram as a very successful version of a standalone app. But how does that change the user base in the entire Facebook experience? Does Facebook care if I'm going to facebook.com anymore?
Well, I think they do care. I mean, certainly they care for sort of advertising and revenue related reasons. The interesting thing will be to watch what happens as they go through. Instagram seems to be working pretty well. Messenger seems to be working pretty well, but they've had other standalone apps that didn't work. I mean, Poke was a bomb. So it's not clear whether A, this will grab enough users, and then B, whether they'll be able to monetize it enough to sort of make it worthwhile. But I do think it's interesting that they want to, that they are trying to sort of splinter to some extent the audience into these, not verticals so much, but I guess Instagram is a vertical in a way, but to sort of segment their users. And that's an interesting experiment in a way. I don't know if it's going to work, but it's you could say, well, it's because Facebook is so broken, but if you look at it a different way, at least they're trying to kind of adapt to mobile and try and figure out what users even want to do on mobile.
I noticed that you're having a conversation on Twitter a few minutes ago about the fact that Facebook didn't have a big event, didn't bring a bunch of reporters and buses to Menlo Park headquarters to talk about this. I think that that's kind of bitten Facebook in the past because it makes it seem like it's the best product ever, and if it isn't, then people are twice as disappointed. Is that, do you see that as a trend of Facebook to kind of like roll out something a little bit with less fanfare?
I hope to God it's a trend because, those huge events are often, well, they're just embarrassing in a lot of ways. They're so, this giant thing. I'm thinking of the home announcement, for example. I don't know anybody who uses that. But so I think if this is what Facebook wants to do, if it wants to kind of iterate and roll out these sort of custom apps and do it on a sort of quieter level and maybe see if they work and tweak them and so on, I think that is a much more effective approach. But it is very different from what Facebook and other sort of large companies have done in the past. So it'll be interesting to see whether it can actually pull that off.
It's very fascinating to see if they can, in fact, and see if anybody can succeed in this space. And it is nice to see Facebook, though, getting into some really, it looks like a really nicely designed app, if a little derivative of some of the other ones that are out there. Well, I thank you for joining us, Matthew. It's very interesting.
Great. Well, thanks for having me.
You can find Matthew at gigaohm.com and also on Twitter at MatthewI. Thanks again. Well, in a minute, we're going to hear about a horrible way to lose weight. But first, I want to tell you about Gazelle. Gazelle is the awesome website that enabled me to get this Lenovo Moto X that I otherwise wouldn't have gotten. If you saw the show a few days ago, you know that I wasn't going to get the wood one. This is the fancy new ebony backed Lenovo Moto X. Because I just already had a Moto X and it seemed like an extravagance. But then I went to the site. I went to Gazelle.com, Gazelle.com, just playing around, just see how much they'd give me. And it turns out that the amount they gave me, plus the discount I got because I had an upgrade on AT&T, meant that I got something like $56 back. So I got not only a new phone in my pocket, but I also got cash in my pocket, thanks to Gazelle. And I really like this site because they're also very environmentally friendly. A phone that's sitting around the garage or in the box or isn't really used is degrading, it's losing value, it's just a problem. By getting it back into circulation, you're actually giving somebody else somewhere a really nice phone that will prevent another phone from being manufactured, which is really, really good. Most of all, though, Gazelle is great for you. It solves your problems. They will give you cash. They'll pay by check, PayPal, or if you use the Amazon gift card option, you can get an extra 5% from what they'd normally give you. Offers are good for 30 days, and I've still got my old Moto X. because I still have another, I don't know, couple weeks left before I can turn it in. The amount that they quoted me is locked in. So offers are locked in for 30 days. They'll wipe your data for free. So if you forget to take off some of the personal information, don't worry about it. They'll take care of it. They have given out more than $100 million to more than 700,000 very happy customers, and most items qualify for a free box. Super, super easy to do. So find out what your iPhone is worth. Take a minute and go to gazelle.com to find out, and do it now, because your iPhone may lose value the longer you wait. So we got some social media
we certainly
here.
did. Clemens S. wrote in our Tech News Today Google Plus community, does the sale of Motorola to Lenovo mean Microsoft will sell Nokia after seeing that it didn't work for Google? I don't know if you could make a direct comparison between the two companies, but I do get what Clemens is getting at, because there was a similar conversation of, well, if Microsoft and Nokia are one team, how does that affect Microsoft and its other partners and trying to get Windows Phone in as many hands of consumers as possible?
Yeah, I think the big shocker when Google purchased Motorola was, wow, they're competing directly against their partners. They're relying on this ecosystem, and that's something you just didn't do. Microsoft sort of set up the stage for that. Years and years, they've always had Windows. Yeah, they made hardware. They made keyboards and things like that. They made Xbox. But, you know, you just didn't compete directly with competitors like that. Google did it, and then it seemed like everybody started trying it. And then again, of course, Microsoft really got into the phone and tablet business more directly.
It seemed Google and Motorola together, people sort of went, why is Google competing against itself? With Microsoft, it's a little bit of, oh, I see, there's the dedicated Windows phones.
There's also the fact that Microsoft has a whole different set of problems. Right now, they're a struggling, also-ran mobile operating system. They're trying to get people to build Windows phones. And it's very difficult because 92% of the market is owned by Nokia. So, you know, and Nokia started flirting with Android phones, which probably is something they should have done long ago. So I think part of this is that Microsoft just wants Nokia to continue to build phones and Windows mobile phones. So it's an entirely different set of problems, I think, for Microsoft. But it's a great thought and a good observation, and we thank you for that. So there are good ways to lose weight, and there are bad ways to lose weight. Tell us about a bad way.
Well, I don't know if it's a bad way. It might be effective. It's a $1.99 app. It's in the App Store, Apple's App Store today. It's called Carrot Fit. And the point is to insult and shame you into getting in shape. So it uses the speech-to-text engine that's built into iOS. So it's that familiar robot voice. What you do is you enter your weight. If you don't enter your weight, it will enter it for you, and you're not really going to like what it says that you weigh. Then you choose an avatar. If your avatar doesn't match the weight that you entered, the app is going to mock you until you pick an accurate one. And then the app lets you eat carrots by sticking with your fitness goals. And then it just continues to insult and harass you into getting skinnier. I'm going to go ahead and say, don't buy.
Yes, in addition,
I would not recommend this on i5.
Yeah, in addition to having to diet, you also get to have your phone hurling insults at you. It sounds like a great model.
Yeah, it's really effective. We've all seen how that really works.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's our show, and we thank you for tuning in. Make sure you send your news tips to our email address at tnt@twit.tv or call 260-TNT-SHOW and leave a message. Also, upvote the stories you'd like to see us cover on our subreddit at technewstoday.reddit.com, and visit our Tech News Today Google Plus community and leave us a message there. If you haven't already, subscribe to Tech News Today at twit.tv/TNT. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll see you tomorrow.